Here for folks like us, wrong city, wrong people.
All right, welcome to the channel, everybody. Aesop Grimm here. This is going to be a playthrough that is preparing for a playthrough of Cyberpunk 2077, and I don't know how long. It could be a while. Basically, what we have to do is we have to set this computer up to play a modded Cyberpunk 2077, and we need to find the limits of what the computer can do visually, especially, and set the mods up accordingly and the settings. Also, I don't want to load a whole bunch of mods up and then not really know what's different and how to use all of them. So it kind of accidentally is going to also act like a little bit of a mod showcase, because we're going to enable one mod at a time. We're going to check out how it works and how it's different from vanilla, and then make sure that the game is running smoothly. And so it's going to work in kind of a tiered system. I'll get to that here in a moment. Actually, maybe we should talk about that first. So here, we're just going to go bullet point by bullet point. Here's what I want to do. I want to show a photo. I want to show you a photorealistic reshade setup, but we're not going to use it. I just want to show it to you in case you guys want to use it. I thought it looked pretty nice, and maybe you have stronger system than I do. But for what I'm wanting to do while recording at 1440p quality, it's just a bit too much. So I'm going to get rid of reshade, because I've looked at how things are with just a pure LUT setup, and that reshade isn't adding enough. In fact, I think I even maybe prefer the LUT setup, to be honest. It's all going to be subjective, but bullet point by bullet point, show a photorealistic reshade setup, explain why I'm not going to use it, which I guess I kind of just did, explain a pure LUT setup, like explain how to do it. That will go into what I would call semi-realism. I'm going to explain to you my DLSS settings. This is all during this series, right? We're going to explain the storage orchestration, explain Vortex installation and mod folder setup. We're going to begin installing what I call mod tools. These are your prerequisite tools that almost all Cyberpunk mods need to have in place for them to work through. If you're familiar with Bannerlord, think of things like Butter Library. I can't think of another example right now, but there's like 4 or 5 mods that all other mods use to work through. And Cyberpunk is similar. There's CET, I can't remember what that stands for. Cyberpunk Extended, I don't know, I can't remember. But there's RedScript, Equipment EX is another one. There's a handful of them. We're going to install all of those, plus any character mods that I've found that I'm going to use right now. I might find some more later down the line. And we're going to make our character. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start testing visual mods to find out how we want it to look. And we're going to go through some LUTs. We're going to set that up first just for color and tone. And then we're going to start applying things like HD texture mods. We're going to check out the performance as we do that. Then we're going to begin adding cosmetic mods. These are things like better looking food, better looking see-through glass, stuff of that nature. And then we'll start putting in gameplay mods, and I'll probably run that in kind of a staged format also. So in other words, we might put in mods like Night City interactions and more immersive whoever the guys are, they give you the missions. I can't think of what they're called now. But more immersive interactions with them. Mods that let V stand and like smoke a cigarette in a certain section. Immersive type mods. And then get into maybe some vehicle type mods, vehicle handling. And then eventually get into maybe some increased crowd and increased vehicle traffic. That actually might be something we do early, because we want to, those are going to be performance impacts, and I need to find where my system's at. And then finally overhaul mods like Dark Future, right? Stuff like that. So there's your snapshot of what this series is going to be about and kind of what we're shooting for. Let me hide that. The way to start this out, though, is to talk about what I've been doing, because a big part of this is finding out what is my system capable of with these mods. The unfortunate situation I'm in is that I can't be sure that it's just as easy as find out where your system begins to slow down on mods. Maybe I can't use the crowd mods and the traffic mods, for example, right? Because I don't know if maybe I might be having some hardware issues or software issues. I'm still kind of figuring all that out, and the reason is because I've recently rebuilt this system. So I want to give you the background context of this, because it's going to be relevant as we're troubleshooting, as we're finding out where the edges of the envelope are, to find out, is this a settings problem? Is this a hardware problem? Or is this just straight up, I've reached the limit of my system, everything is optimized, and I just can't use this mod or this graphical improvement because it's too much to be running that and recording at the same time. So if you look at the top here, that's my new computer that I bought all these parts and I installed them. So I got the new motherboard, the Aorus Elite AX B650, kind of a budget board, but not as budget as I thought. It was the same price as a lower model, so I felt pretty good about getting that. I got a good deal. I got the AMD Ryzen 7 7800X3D CPU. So that's a really, really strong CPU according to AI, and we're going to be talking about AI here in a minute. For gaming. Excuse me. My GPU is an MSI Shadow 2X RTX 5060 Ti. My new RAM, all of this is new stuff. My new RAM is 32 gigabyte of DDR5 6400 speed. My operating system is installed on a Samsung 980 NVMe 1TB Gen 3 X4. I know that probably sounds like Greek to some of you guys out there, but you can also look these parts up and start to learn what they're about. NVMe being a key word, and the generation. And then I just bought this last one. My games SSD that I will load my games and my mods onto is the Corsair M700 Pro XT NVMe 1TB PCIe 5, which is another way of saying Gen 5, but it goes specifically in the PCIe slot, which my computer only has one. As far as I know, most computers only have one, but some of the higher end have two, and it's a ×4 as well. So those are the new components that I bought. I installed them. I turned the system on. It powered up, and it failed to boot into Windows. So after doing some troubleshooting, I learned all kinds of stuff about CFM, legacy, MBR, and UEFI. These are disk format types. I don't know if I'm using the right word there, but it's something to do with how the disk is made, or read, what language it's in. I don't quite know how to explain that because I'm not sure of the details. And also what kind of boot system is it using? Is it using an old legacy boot system? That's what CFM and MBR are. MBR is like the format type, CFM is the boot type. Or is it using a modern UEFI structure? And during this whole process, I found I kind of panicked. I was like, holy smokes. And I got my Windows Creation Media Disk USB that I have on hand. And I went and I tried to reinstall Windows. It tried to do it and it failed in the process. But what it didn't fail to do, because it did get initiated, is I somehow picked the wrong drive, I guess, and I installed it onto my mechanical hard drive. It ended up failing, but it did not fail in wiping that hard drive, and that's how I lost all of my saved OBS assets. That's why in some of my videos I was telling you guys I had to remake my intros and outros, because I lost my MAGA intro and outros through that. And that's unfortunate, because I liked those intros and outros, but I also really like my new ones too. So it's not a huge loss, but that's how that happened. It wiped that drive. Tried to install Windows 11, or I guess it would be Windows 10 at that time, and it failed. Eventually, after working with AI on my phone and AI suggesting some things, it was saying, hey, sometimes whenever you have NVMe drives, it causes some of the SATA ports to go dead, so you want to take a look at which port you want to plug your main operating system SSD, which for me was a SATA SSD, into port number 1, because that one should not be knocked out. Or, sometimes it's called port 0, but it's your first port. So whenever I went to do that, what I discovered was that either through my own neglect, I forgot to do it because I was in and out of my system a few times as I was rebuilding this physically, but also the connections are very loose on this SATA SSD, so they could have just gotten jostled loose, but whatever it was, both the power and the data cable were completely unplugged. So I plugged those back in, and whenever I did that, I powered up and it booted right into Windows. Okay, so there's that covered the second block. Installed new components, went through much troubleshooting, learned about CFM, MBR, UEFI, accidentally overwrote hard drive, mechanical hard drive, trying to install Windows. And then I began to save my personal data for migration. Whenever I say that, I mean like my Documents folder, stuff that I had, my OBS settings, things of that nature. Which, by the way, through the process of all this, because I've done several iterations of this now, and I lost my OBS settings. I had to re-download my REA plugins, which is what makes my mic audio sound more like a blue mic, more radio quality, and I had to go and do all those settings over again. I just did it for this video, so hopefully my mic audio is working well, but you guys let me know. My voice is a little bit dry also, but in the recording testings that I did, the way that I have my settings up, there's enough bass added that I think you're not picking up that dry part, but we'll see. So then the next thing that I did, guys, is because I was booted into Windows, AI helped me figure some things out. It suggested that I go download a free program called Mini Tool Partition Wizard. Yeah, it was that. So I downloaded that, I opened it up, and used that to wipe my Gen 3 SSD. Now, this is a lot of nomenclature I'm throwing at you guys, but basically for the three things I'm using nomenclature for, and to understand their differences, I have a SATA SSD. That's a legacy, old school SSD drive. It is faster than a mechanical drive, but it is quickly becoming outdated and going the way of the dinosaur. I have a Gen 3 NVMe SSD drive. This is the kind of drive that installs on your motherboard under a heatsink. and that one's still relevant. And I have a brand new Gen 5 SSD. The Gen 3 SSD I want to use for my operating system, and the Gen 5 SSD is for my games and my mods. Okay, so that's what, and then the SATA SSD is going to be used as my primary storage device. So those are the three categories of SSDs I have and what they're being used for. So now you know SATA SSD, Gen 3 SSD, and Gen 5 SSD are the terms I'm using to distinguish between them. So using that mini tool wizard, I wiped my Gen 3 NVMe SSD, which previously was being used for storage. Now that's important because that made it a CFM drive. Well, an MBR drive, because I was using it for storage, and I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. So I wiped it, prepared it for Windows installation, rebooted my system, went through my USB drive, installed Windows successfully onto my Gen 3 SSD. But because it was an MBR drive, it could not put, for Windows 11, the boot table onto that drive. So it installed the boot table onto the next viable drive it saw, which was my SATA SSD. Now, either through this process or something that happened before, because I was doing a lot of mixing and matching and troubleshooting through AI. This whole section up here in section 2 of this text that you see where it says installed new components, went through much troubleshooting, that was a hassle. It took a lot. I worked with AI a lot, went back and forth days of just learning stuff. So it's very possible that I accidentally upgraded my Windows 10 on my SATA SSD to Windows 11. Either way, what ended up happening here is that even though I installed Windows 11 to my Gen 3 SSD and was fully intending to use that as my primary operating system drive, unbeknownst to me, it was actually booting into my old SATA drive. Now, because it's Windows 11 though, it looks different, and I'm thinking, okay, cool, I'm in my new drive, but I was not. And because it installed Windows 11, it overwrote a lot of my old stuff, so whenever I went into the file structure, it looked different, and I'm having to add things, just like it was a new drive. I'm having to add all of my AMD drivers, I'm having to add in Vortex and stuff like that. It looked to me like I was on a completely new drive, but I wasn't, and that's important to understand. So whenever I started testing Cyberpunk, I was actually running my operating system in Vortex off of this SATA drive. And for one reason or another, it eventually corrupted my Vortex. What was happening is I was starting to run into CTD problems with Cyberpunk, but then it migrated over to my Bannerlord, which was not running through Vortex. And then eventually I had a problem with my Crusader Kings 3, which is just a map game, and that shouldn't be having a problem at all. And so all of these things began to raise my red flags, and I was really actually worried, guys, that my brand new PCIe 5 SSD was getting thermal throttled and I was destroying it. So I worked through, this is all relevant because as we go through this series, I still need to be looking at, am I running into a problem where my GPU is just tapped out? Or are my drives not set up right? Or is Windows not set up right? Or am I not optimized across the system through the various apps? Those are all playing a factor that are complicating this entire process, right? So anyway, after a while, Vortex actually corrupted and wouldn't work. It told me that I needed to reinstall it. So I did, and it fixed it and things were working, but in game I was starting to run into some frame rate issues, and things were looking kind of, I don't know quite how to describe it, but it looked kind of fisheye lensed to me some, almost like you could get motion sickness. I don't tend to get motion sickness, but I suspect that people who do would from this experience. And I think that's because I had some frame stuttering going on, like what's called micro frame stuttering. Anyway, I just was getting more and more suspicious. And through working with AI, which let's talk about that for a minute. This is the instructional part. I want to throw this in here. We're at 20 minutes. I'm going to try and make this short and sweet. But we're going to open this up. And it looks like I still have my examples. Okay, so AI. AI is scary to a lot of people, and for good reason. This is not unlike any other time that we've had an industrial revolution type moment where technology leaped forward. Humans have had to deal with this all of our lives. When we have a new technology that changes the landscape for wide amounts of people, it creates what's called a paradigm shift. And new things that were previously completely unavailable to us are now available. But the whole nature of this is that you're entering into uncharted territory, and so there's always some hits and misses, there are some lessons learned, and there are some casualties. And so people are real nervous about AI, and they have good reason to be nervous. Relationships is one example. It doesn't have much to do with what we're talking about here, but that's one critical example I can think of that a lot of people are like, holy smokes, man, is this going to be good for society? Because you can see where things are going, right? But just like any tool of this nature that creates a paradigm shift, the cat's out the bag, and you ain't getting that sucker back in. So it's too powerful to not learn to use. So I'm going to try and give some examples here of how you can use it and mitigate current day AI's tendency to sometimes get some things wrong, but say it so convincingly that it steers you down a wrong path. I'm going to teach you how to mitigate that a little bit. All right, so we're at about 23 minutes. I'm going to try and limit this to 15 minutes max. The way that you do this is that you start by asking it a question, okay? Let's just copy this question. What did this whole thing say? Oh, I think it showed us right there. What is the optimal storage setup for an intensely modded video? Stand by for me, guys. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So that's the question. Now, let's talk about something else, because this is fundamental. This is the concept that I want you to have in mind, especially you young people out there. We have a cliche. There's no such thing as a stupid question. But everybody kind of knows, yeah, there is. There are lots of stupid questions. The whole thing that the cliche is there for, the short phrase, that the nuance that it is implying is that you really can't ask smart questions until you build up your information on the subject. And the more data and knowledge, I guess that's the word you're looking for, the more knowledge you have of a given subject, the smarter and more intelligent questions you can ask, and the more you can challenge answers, instead of just sitting there like a sponge and soaking up the first smart answer that you ever heard, which could be completely wrong, but it's worded in a really effective way, and you've never heard anything on this subject before, so you just swallow it hook, line, and sinker. The more information that you have, the more knowledge you have of a subject, the better you can avoid those kinds of things, and you can question some stuff. So the way that you do that, though, is you have to start at square one, and square one oftentimes includes stupid questions. You gotta ask, you gotta start somewhere. and then you go from there. So this question that I have right here, what is the optimal storage setup for an intensely modded video game while recording at high quality? And the way that I got to that is by asking other kinds of questions with Grok and ChatGPT and getting an idea that there even needed to be an optimal storage setup instead of having everything on one drive, right? There's no way I could have even asked this question. The central premise is asking for an optimal storage setup if I hadn't done other knowledge gathering that let me know that there is such a thing. But now that I have that knowledge, I can ask it, and I usually start by just asking Google. And in Google, we can see for an intensely modded video game with high quality recording, the optimal storage setup requires a combination of fast internal storage for game performance and recording, along with sufficient capacity for large file sizes. SSDs or NVMe drives are ideal for recording gameplay due to their fast write speeds, which prevent interruptions during high quality video capture. NVMe SSDs in particular offer significantly faster speeds than traditional SATA SSDs, making them highly beneficial for minimizing stuttering and ensuring smooth recording, especially with demanding modded games that feature high-resolution textures, complex models, and dynamic effects. And then it goes on and gives you some more detail, and down here for optimal performance, use an NVMe SSD as the primary drive for both game installation and recording. And consider adding a secondary high-capacity hard drive, mechanical hard drive, that's what this means, or SSD for long-term storage of edited videos or backups. Okay, so there's your first general response. Now, whenever I ask a question here in Google and I get this response, if it's an area that I really don't have any knowledge in at all, I haven't asked these kinds of questions before, a lot of times I'll come down here and I'll click on a Reddit site, or Tom's Hardware is especially good. If you grew up in the pre-AI days, you know that Tom's Hardware is a well-established, popular forum that has consistently given good technical advice on a whole litany of things. I was around whenever this first stood up, and it got a name pretty early on, a good reputation, and it has pretty much stayed that way the entire time. So that's why you see them up here towards the top. So if we click them, what you can do is you can read what this person's question was. Is there a best or better storage option for saving game recording and streams? And then read what actual human responses are from human beings that have knowledge in this area. And that might help you ask a more detailed question. Sorry, right here. Or question something that's in here. Okay, so we're just knowledge gathering. This is, you have to kind of enjoy doing this. This is part of owning a computer, a PC. In my opinion, it is. Now, what I'll do after I've garnered new data here and I kind of understand the hows and whys is I will then go to, typically I go to Grok first. The thing is that ChatGPT is completely unlimited. So if it's an area that I think I'm going to need a lot of instruction on, I'll go ChatGPT first, and then I'll use Grok to sanity check some things that ChatGPT says. And I'll play it the other way around also. So I use these two in conjunction with each other, and I kind of pit them against each other to see if they agree or disagree with one another. And that's how I mitigate the chance that AI could steer me down the wrong course. If I get both of these guys agreeing, then I feel pretty good about the direction I'm headed. So let's look at the ChatGPT. Oh, it disappeared. Okay, well, that sucks. Is the Grok one still up? The Grok one is still up. So here's the question. Let me try and simulate this again. I went to ChatGPT first. I typed in this question. I'm trying to record a highly modded Cyberpunk 2077 with path tracing at 1440p high quality settings. What is your recommended storage setup for operating system, OBS, and Game Plus Mods installation? ChatGPT thinks about it. And ChatGPT also tends to answer faster than Grok does. But in my experience, guys, Grok is more consistently accurate on technical nuances. It's also unfiltered. So you can get uncensored responses from Grok, which I tend to just trust a little bit more than censored answers. I understand that the censorship there is there for legal reasons and typically is probably going to have to do with NSFW stuff, or it can be politically incorrect stuff. I just don't. When the developers start to create censorship, it makes me think that I'm now, instead of getting information, I'm getting a take. I'm getting, like, the AI is reflecting their worldview. So if I want to know what is the best psychological therapy for somebody experiencing I'm trying to think how to word this. Somebody experiencing problems with finding their place in society, and understanding their worth and value. Okay, now let me break that down for you and tell you what I have in my mind. What I'm thinking of is a teenage daughter who is having a hard time understanding what she wants to do in life, and is also feeling social pressure to directly compete and outperform boys, as opposed to embracing the unique things that make girls so special, right? If I were to ask that in ChatGPT, where it's perhaps politically censored, what was that word I used earlier? I can't remember now. But for socio-political reasons, it's censored. ChatGPT might come back and say, well, you need to get her counseling that empowers her, you know? And what it's going to do is it's going to reference, like, modern day psychology. And modern day psychology right now that's being taught all across academia says, because this is a worldview, it says there is no difference between men and women. So then whenever we're addressing the problems whether it's in a female mind or a male mind, we're going to apply a universal one-size-fits-all methodology. Well, that, quite frankly, pardon the French, but that's bullshit. And that's very harmful to human beings. We know for a fact a female mind works differently than a male mind. Females have different needs and a different priority structure than men do. It's not lesser than, it's not greater than, it's just different. It's apples and oranges. So if you're going to treat her as though she were a dude, you're not helping her at all. You're just going to confuse her, right? Grok won't do that because Grok is uncensored. So anyway, that's just, so I don't trust. I probably went too much into detail and I wasted precious time on that, but I'm just a little bit leery of censorship, so I prefer Grok. Also, Grok has just flat out, in proven cases, consistently been more technically nuanced and accurate. But let's take a look at what ChatGPT said It said recording Cyberpunk 2077 with heavy mods and path tracing at 1440p HQ is brutal on both GPU and storage, especially if you want stutter-free captures. Here's a clean, practical storage layout that works well for high bitrate OBS recording. Okay, so recommended storage layout is a 3-drive setup. That's ideal. It wants your OS and your apps on drive number 1. It'll give you the purpose, and it'll give you why. It keeps Windows background tasks isolated so they don't interrupt recording or asset streaming. Then it wants the game and mods drive on drive number 2. It gives you what it wants you to get, some examples, and then why. Path tracing and modded textures constantly stream data. Slow storage equals hitching even if your GPU is strong. Avoid SATA SSDs here. Even a fast SATA drive can cause micro stutter with heavy texture mods. Okay, so what it's telling you, and you would have to read this to get more thorough, but what it's saying is that whenever you're playing a game and you're using mods, especially when you're using mods, I should say, and you're recording at the same time, there are 2 functions happening. You are reading data. You're what's called streaming assets. Those high texture mods, those are all assets. You're streaming those into your video game. Your OBS, though, is recording it, so it's writing data. Now, there is something called thermal bottlenecking. So if you have all of this happening on the same drive, and especially where my PCIe 5 drive is, which is right next to my CPU and my GPU, you're causing it to heat up. You're also just keeping it busy. It's like juggling 4 or 5 balls, right? It's having to do all of this all at the same time, and that's why it's talking about micro stuttering and stuff like that. You want to keep these things separate. So that's why it wants you to put your operating system and your apps like Vortex and OBS are all going to be stored on one drive. Then you're going to put your game and your mods on another drive, and then it wants you to record to a 3rd drive. And right here, it's saying that it could be a Gen 3 NVMe, but it prefers Gen 4. And it says why this matters a lot. And it emphasizes a lot. All right. Now, I think that that's important because I kind of thought the games and mods was the most important thing. But I think it's saying that this is the most important thing. High quality 1440p recordings can write 300 to 800 megabytes per second continuously. You do not want to write to the OS drive, and you don't want to write to the game drive because it's forcing your system to juggle some high intensity things on the same drive, which will cause dropped frames and audio desync in your recordings. So it wants you to put this on a 3rd separate drive. Okay. Then it gives you some suggested recording settings for OBS. Then down here you have optional upgrades and what not to do. It just wants to foot stomp on these things right here. And then it gives you a summary. OS and OBS on a terabyte NVMe Gen 4 drive. Cyberpunk and mods on a 2 terabyte NVMe Gen 4 drive. And OBS recordings on a 2 terabyte NVMe Gen 3 or 4 drive. Okay, now, if I wanted to sanity check that, I would come up here, I would copy this, I would paste it into Grok, and I would just ask Grok that question. Now, Grok gives this answer. For recording heavily modded, so it's the same question. For recording heavily modded Cyberpunk 2077 with path tracing at 1440p high quality settings using OBS. Storage setup prioritizes fast game loading, reduced stuttering, and reliable high bitrate recording without dropped frames. So right away, the overarching concept is verbatim what ChatGPT is saying. That makes me feel really good. That makes me think that it's because both of them are saying the same thing. I'm like, okay, I think that's truth then. Now let's get a little bit deeper. Key considerations. Game and mods. Base game and Phantom Liberty is 70 to 80 gigabyte, but heavy modding easily pushes this to 200 to 500 gigabyte. The game benefits greatly from fast storage for quick loading, texture streaming, and minimizing stutters, especially with path tracing and mods that increase asset demands. NVMe SSD is strongly recommended over SATA or mechanical hard drive. OBS recording at 1440p, it gives you some suggested settings, so you could compare these to what ChatGPT suggested. Files are large. Modern SSDs handle this easily. Even mechanical hard drives can, if not lossless. Separate the recording drive from the game drive to avoid contention. Game reading heavily while OBS writes sequentially. Operating systems should always be on fast storage for snappy system response and path tracing impact. No direct storage bottleneck mentioned in benchmarks or sources, but fast SSD helps overall with asset loading in this demanding setup, and it does also specify NVMe. All right, so for a recommended setup, ideal for performance, longevity, and avoiding issues. It wants your operating system and your OBS Studio installation on your primary this is disk 1, okay? It wants your video game and your mods on disk 2. And it wants your OBS recordings on disk 3. So again, both ChatGPT and Grok are saying a 3 drive setup here is ideal. Now, so that again makes me feel really good because they're not disagreeing with each other so far. Grok goes on to say, for a budget or minimal setup, a single large NVMe SSD for your OS, your OBS, and your game, and record to a secondary SATA SSD or mechanical hard drive. This works well. Modern NVMe handles concurrent game read and OBS write without issues for encoded captures. So it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but it works well. Now this caught my attention because, as I told you just a second ago, I thought having your games and your mods on a separate drive was more important than having your OBS record to a second drive. But it was already suggesting between the two that the recordings were best. And if I hadn't gotten that, if I hadn't read between the lines yet, this right here really hammers it home. It's saying for a budget setup, put your games and your OS on the same drive. And I was like, whoa, what, really? That's more important? It's more important to have your OBS recording to a separate drive than to have your game and mods on a second drive? So what I did is I came over to ChatGPT and no, I'm sorry. I must have asked this. Oh no, it was in ChatGPT, guys. So let's just fake it right here. Grok says that if I only have 2 SSDs, it is more important to separate OBS recordings from the OS SSD and to, let's say, co-locate, if I could spell that, and to store my games and mods on my OS SSD. Do you agree? Short answer, yes, I mostly agree with that advice, with one important caveat. Specific to Cyberpunk 2077 path tracing and heavy mods. With only 2 SSDs, the single most important separation is keep OBS recordings off the operating system drive. That part is absolutely correct. So then it tells you why. The real trade-off, game versus OS drive. Now the question becomes, should Cyberpunk and mods live on the OS SSD or the recording SSD? Okay, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. Best 2-drive allocation. SSD number 1, Windows plus OBS plus Cyberpunk plus mods. Game streaming benefits from OS level caching and low latency access. SSD number 2, OBS recordings only. Clean, uninterrupted write performance. So yes, in a 2 SSD system, I agree with Grok's conclusion. Okay, here's the caveat. Very important. This advice assumes your operating system SSD is NVMe. It is not near full. It is not a low-end DRAM-less SATA SSD. Okay, so see, ChatGPT takes into account that you didn't specify what your specifics are for what kinds of SSD systems you have. So it says, well, it kind of depends. Give me some more information. That's really, really smart, right? And then you can, well, let's say that you had a SATA SSD and you had a NVMe SSD. So let's go back to Grok. Oh, we got to sign in to continue, so it's done. But you could specify that in there if that was your conditions, and it would probably, you could even tell it. ChatGPT says that if I have a SATA SSD and an NVMe SSD, then I should where was that?
There's a canvas with 2 faces, a fallen angels who loved him.
Okay, so you would have to ask Grok, what if my operating system is on a SATA SSD? Should I still load my games and mods on SSD, on that SSD, and record to SSD 2? That's how you would ask it. And see what Grok says. And by bouncing back and forth between the two, you can generally get to a consensus. You'll get them to agree with each other. My best example I have to give to you about that is that I was asking, let me show you my desktop. I was asking ChatGPT whether I was asking it how to set up NVIDIA control panel to run this Cyberpunk setup. So let's see, that's the wrong thing. I meant to open this window here. So let's open NVIDIA control panel. It told me to go to manage 3D settings, come down to vertical sync, and put this to on, and then go in game and set it to off, so that it used the vertical sync from NVIDIA itself instead of the game's vertical sync. And that would help it link up or sync up with G-Sync, which my monitor is capable of. I have a Samsung G7 1440p 240 FPS monitor, and it's G-Sync capable. So that's what it said. Well, I had watched, remember, I said the more knowledge you get, the better questions you can ask, and sometimes you can even challenge a response. Well, I had just been, a couple days ago, watched I think 3 different videos on NVIDIA control panel setups, and all of them said turn V-Sync off. So I went to Grok and I said, here's my question. ChatGPT says that I should enable vertical sync through control panel and disable it in game. Do you agree? And Grok was like, I firmly disagree. Like, Grok doesn't normally say that. Grok has to. Grok isn't overly metaphorical or overly dramatic, and so it will only say that if it's like absolutely no. And that's what it was saying. And it went on to give me a detailed explanation of how frame generation works, and that it conflicts directly, if I remember right, with vertical sync. And so you don't want any vertical sync at all. So I went back to ChatGPT and I said, look, Grok says you're out of your mind. And it says that I should not. And then I pasted, here's what Grok said. And so ChatGPT read what Grok said about all the frame generation stuff. And it said, I said, okay, both answers are correct. It said, for most games, you do want vertical sync enabled. And it told me this is per NVIDIA's own team. This is what they say. Enable vertical sync in your NVIDIA control panel so that it can make use, it links up better with G-Sync monitors. So it said, but for Cyberpunk frame generation in particular, Grok is absolutely right. And so what you should do is you should go to program settings in your NVIDIA control panel. This is ChatGPT telling me. Set up a specific program setting for Cyberpunk 2077 and go down and disable vertical sync in the program settings so that NVIDIA is not forcing it, and also disable it in game because Grok was spot on. So that's what I mean by, I wanted to teach that, and I don't know how long that took. I think I probably went over 15 minutes. I usually do, but I wanted to throw that out there as kind of a tutorial of sorts for anybody, but especially young people, on what I think is a smart way to use AI. It's these three components. You ask your first basic question here and let Google AI answer you. You go take a look at some forums to see what humans who actually know about this stuff are saying, which helps you ask more detailed questions. From there, you open up ChatGPT, and because ChatGPT is unlimited, this is where I would go first, and you ask it your question. Maybe you have tightened that question up based on what you've learned, and maybe you want to give it your system specs and stuff. It gives you an answer. If you see something there that you're not sure about, or if you're so, at this point in time, ignorant on the subject that you're like, I have no idea, I can only take it at its word, then you can go to Grok. Grok has it has a limited response time, but it cycles every 2 hours. So you can use it several times a day, and you can copy and paste your question in. Then within that question, just hit enter a couple times and say, here's what ChatGPT said. If you wanted to, you could copy and paste the entire thing, all of ChatGPT's response, and put it into your query. For Grok, Grok will read it. Grok will look at what your question is. Grok will read ChatGPT's answer. Grok will reference the internet, and then Grok will tell you whether it agrees or disagrees and why. And if there's a disagreement, you can take whatever snippets you want or the entire Grok response, bounce it back to ChatGPT, and ask it something like, in light of this new information from Grok, do you agree or disagree with Grok? Or you might want to say, do you maintain your previous stance, or do you want to adjust your answer? Something, in light of this new information, something like that. And you can eventually get these two to kind of align. They're both referencing internet materials, but the internet has a wide range of materials. If you're playing a game like Skyrim that's flipping 30 years old, then there's a lot of information out there that is no longer relevant, and ChatGPT and Grok sometimes have a hard time. ChatGPT more so, I think. Well, I don't know. They both do have a hard time telling what's applicable and what's not. But you can sanity check each other. And I think that helps mitigate the danger of AI steering you down a wrong path. So now that we're done with that, let's re-enable this slide right here and basically move on. So we're done with the AI part. Let's see, I don't remember if I ran through all this. We're on paragraph 3, I think. So I installed Windows 11 on my Gen 3 NVMe SSD, and I booted into Windows, and I began my data migration, moving stuff that I had stored on other drives, personal files and stuff, over to my Gen 3 SSD. And I got all my games and mods set up on my Gen 5 SSD, and then I began to test Cyberpunk, and then I ran into those problems I was telling you about, where eventually Vortex got corrupted, right? And after working with AI, I began really looking at my hard drives more, and I finally noticed that Windows 11 was on my Gen 3 SSD, but I was still operating on my SATA SSD. And whenever I saw that Windows 11 was installed over the Windows 10 on the SATA SSD, then I tried reinstalling Windows 11 through my USB drive. Now, I ran into some issues there, because what it did next is that it went to my Gen 5 SSD, which meant that it completely wiped my Gen 5 SSD. All those mods, all those files that I had, gone, right? And so I got really frustrated. I was like, holy smokes, man, this thing is like using every option except for my Gen 3. So I went in and I physically unplugged all this stuff. I actually opened my system up, pulled my GPU out, unplugged my Gen 5 SSD and put it on a table, heat sink down to kind of protect it, you know. And I unplugged every single drive except for my Gen 3 SSD. And that's what it says. Okay, so it installed on Gen 5 SSD. I unplugged all my SATA drives and removed my Gen 5 SSD. And whenever I booted up Windows, it saw a drive there, but it was not bootable. And it wanted, oh, I forget how it phrased it. Something about drivers. It needed certain drivers. So then I opened my system up again. I reconnected my SATA SSD. I booted into Windows. I went to AI. I told it all of what was happening, and it was like, you need to get a second USB stick, and you need to go to Gigabyte. And at this website, it gave me the website, and download the AMD chipset and the driver files. Actually, I didn't really need the AMD chipset. It was a certain set of driver files. It was like a folder, like an archive for new installations. Like, it actually said that. And that was to allow the system to see SSD drives. So I downloaded that archive, I opened it up, I extracted the files to a second USB drive. I plugged that in along with my Windows Creation SSD drive, and this time whenever I booted up, it didn't ask me any questions at all. It got straight into the Windows installation system, and that's because it automatically found those drivers that it was looking for on that second USB drive. It didn't have to ask me. It says, I see it. It installed them lickety-split, put me right into the Windows installation. This time whenever I installed it, it did put, because it auto-converted from a MBR format drive to a UEFI. That's part of the Windows installation system if the drive is capable of it. And I guess now that it had the NVMe drivers installed, it was capable of doing that. So it converted it and it put the boot table on there also. Now I was able to turn the system off, plug all of my drives back in, including my Gen 5 SSD, and boot. I went into my BIOS and I made sure that my Gen 3 SSD was the primary boot option, and it was. And so then I booted into that drive. So moral of the story being, we are now at a position that we can properly test this I am operating off of my Gen 3, my operating system is running off my Gen 3 SSD, and my Gen 5 SSD is set up to have mods installed to it. Do I have mods on there right now? I forget. I just have the folders. Yeah. I have my games set up here though. These are the 4 games that I have right now. This is Surviving Mars. So we're at least set up hardware wise, and I did the read-write tests on here with Crystal Info, and I did a benchmark test, and everything is doing really great, and we're ready to go. Okay, so that's kind of a how we got here from their situation. I don't think we're going to have hardware conflicts, but you now know the surrounding context in case something else comes up that's not quite right. So what else is this saying? Began to test Cyberpunk. Good performance. Having a hard time determining if SSDs were stable. Okay, I talked about all that. Began investigating hard drives more. Noticed Win 11 on Gen 3, but still operating on SATA SSD. Alright, tried reinstalling. It installed on Gen 5 instead. I unplugged everything. Windows did not see a bootable disk on Gen 3. Reconnected so I could boot into Windows. Wiped my Gen 3 SSD and downloaded motherboard drivers. Rebooted from USB and installed Windows 11. Now PC was using Gen 3. Okay, so we've gone through all of this. So let's see, we're at an hour. But I want to... Well, we should probably stop it right here. That makes this entire video skippable if people aren't interested in all the surrounding context. In the next video, we're going to cover how to install Vortex, how to get your Vortex mod folders installed on a separate SSD or separate drive. How to we're going to install, well, I have these things installed already, but I'll walk you through it. We'll talk about how to set Steam library up on another SSD. It's really easy. I'll just take you right through it. And that might not take us very long at all, actually. And we might be able to actually get into beginning to download mods for Cyberpunk. And the first test of Cyberpunk is going to be a vanilla test. Just Cyberpunk vanilla. The only mods that we'll have loaded up are those utility mods that I was talking about, and character creation mods, because there are certain things like skin tone and stuff that you can only do at the initial character creation. You cannot change it after that. So there might be a mod that gives me access to all of that. There probably is, to be honest, but I want to have the few character creation mods that I've gotten to be loaded already to create our character. But effectively, it is pretty much 99.9% running as a vanilla setup. And we'll go through, we'll play the intro scene, and we'll just kind of look at how the system is performing frame rate wise and all that good stuff, guys. That'll all be in the next episode. So again, I'm Aesop Grimm. Thank you for coming by the channel. I hope you like what you saw. Hope you learned some things in there about, especially with the AI stuff. I really hope that's helpful to somebody out there. This is new tech, and I think there's smart ways of doing things and dumb ways of doing things. And I'm by no means an expert, but this is like what I call community knowledge or cloud knowledge. This is how humanity moves forward, is we just all share our experiences with each other when we're dealing with new stuff. And it can help. It's like holding a lamp up out in front of you. It can help you see a little bit further into the fog of the unknown. Even if I end up getting something wrong, you can learn from my mistake, right? So I thought that was pretty important. And we're done with this episode. So again, I'm Aesop Grimm. Thank you for coming by the channel. I hope you like what you saw. More importantly, I hope all is well in your neck of the woods. And I'll see you in the next episode where this story continues.
This place ain't no such thing as civilized.